Hey guys, thank you for joining us again for another exciting episode of YOML. This is the Year of Magical Learning podcast. Today we're doing Reflection 256, and it's one of our top 10 book, and we're closing this reflection. This is part 5 of 5 of the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. So let's see what Chris has in mind for his reflection.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Obviously, this is one of my and yours, I assume, at this point in time too. Top favorite books ever read. Definitely not an easy read, but I swear to you, it's very interesting. Yeah, I think later on down the road, one of the things that I personally have learned, I guess, in this journey is people take a lot of other people's work and then they just say, like, there's so many books that I've read where it's like I hear the same psychological experiments that somebody else did that's pieced together to form their own narrative and their own version of something else that they're trying to, and it's very rare you actually read the source code of where a lot of these things came from,
Yeah, and, you want the origin, right? The origin, like you're talking about Darwin's origin. You're talking about the 7 habits. This is what I mean by when I read an author's book, I'm reading his life work, which is like they're talking about somebody is spending their time in the trenches, studying everything, and then compiling to and orchestrating to this meaningful book for us. Not somebody who is a professional writer goes out there, okay, oh, I read this book and I'm gonna have a story and I'll summarize it or whatever, and I take a piece out of it, and then bam, right? It's not your work; it's somebody else's work. You just distill it, you're synthesizing it. So, in essence, like because somebody is taking one point out of, let's say, the book about the 7 habits of highly effective people, somebody can go in there and take something, book about it, right? But you want to go back and say, well, what is the origin
where did
of
that come from?
The origin comes from this guy who's through his career built this habit and teaching this to his clients and kind of foundation for his career. You're taking his lifetime work and you build upon it. So when you read that kind of book, you are essentially absorbing 50 years worth of knowledge from a person.
Yeah.
Not only that you're observing and orchestrated, prepared knowledge. Not just like, oh, here's a water fountain. No, he distilled it. Well, in a book, right? Like throughout of all your experiences, right? There's certain things that makes sense and certain that makes sense, and then you take it and you kind of lay them out in an order where it makes sense to the user, to the reader, and so you not only get the experience, the data, the validation, but also like the summation of what all this means.
That's a great point. I know this isn't about the reflection at all, but like you actually see this in like the top 10 favorite books in this journey. Thinking Fast and Slow is a very original book. I'm not saying that everything that Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky did in there was 100% their own thoughts. I mean, but the work was original, right? Like it was very much so like them interpreting it and like you said, doing everything you just talked about. Then you got like The Black Swan or like any Nassim Taleb book. I mean, this is this guy's soul in the game, like he is all in on randomness. I mean, like that's his life's passion and work and exploration. And, yes, he cites a lot of other sources, but it's all combined together into a unique.
I mean, it's a study. It's not just a distillation of an existing concept and idea, right? So he basically does his career, which is behavior economics, right? He does behavior economics, right?
Yeah.
Right. So that's his life work. And so he studies the underlining, but then actually take it and say, well, I studied these things. I found these things, right? So they actually found something and they're reporting it. Exactly. Versus somebody say, hey, I'm going to take exactly
I'm gonna
the same
concept,
maybe, the art of not giving a fuck, for example. It's, maybe you take it from some existing study. I mean, you kind of learned it, but you didn't study it and distill something different. You just take it and
regurgitated it in a different, right. Where I was going with what I was saying is like, the Black Swan, super original, synthesis, like, in terms of taking other information, processing and turning it into something unique that's their own. Thinking Fast and Slow, same thing. The Happiness Hypothesis, same thing. Seven Habits, same thing. Think Like a Monk is one of those kind of ones that I wrote a 5-part reflection on. That was unique because it was that guy's lived experience and turning it into how he applied that to a different world and a different universe. And like one of the only ones that I feel like isn't maybe the most unique is Humankind. Sapiens, like that's a great example as well. That was another top 5 favorite, right? But maybe the only one I can think of like one of my top favorites that I did like a 5-part reflection on over the course of this journey was like Humankind, where that book was kind of a regurgitation a little bit of a lot of the things,
thing is,
but it was really unique regurgitation. It wasn't like everybody else's.
For the most part, usually an author will have only one book, 1 to 2 books, right?
If it's about their life, if it's unique,
maybe 3 books in terms of Taleb's, because Taleb, he broke it down, but he couldn't write it in one book. But
he really only wrote 2 good ones.
Thing is, if the book is about his life work,
right,
then that book is basically the good book. But if he continues to write on top of it, he's adding anything more to.
Yeah, Skin in the Game had nothing really new to add, in my opinion.
Right, Skin in the Game is rant about how people don't have skin in the game.
Pretty much, yeah.
I mean, right, it's so a lot of time, just like the origin. My thing is, you think about the origin of the species, right? That's Darwin's lifetime work, and basically it's in one book. And any book he writes isn't going to be as good because he spent his entire life collecting these species and categorizing these species. What else can he write that say, hey, it is so good, just as good as the origin of the species? Think about it.
No, you're right, and I mean we've talked about this many a times. Specifically, you remember the Kevin Smith book, the movie director Kevin Smith, in Clerks was his famous debut movie. It was uniquely Kevin Smith. The movie actually sucked. Like, it was poorly filmed, didn't have a big budget, like the actors were no ones, and really the plot was just stupid. But at the same time, like, he did it, and it was such a unique movie that only he could tell about his own lived experiences in life, But then after that happened, everybody was like, I want more of that Kevin Smith, and then it became like, well, that's a Kevin Smith kind of movie. And then it was just him trying to recreate, in different ways, kind of like Skin in the Game, in my opinion, of like, Taleb is like, hey, look, we love the Black Swan, Anti-Fragile. Now it's like, now he just keeps writing about the same kind of genre, the world, whatever. Now it's becoming like a job, now you're like, well, all right, I think I said everything I wanted to say about that. And I need to go back to living for another 20 years before I could come up with a new theory that I've been practicing and as a practitioner in the field with my soul in the game, to then come back to you with something that's completely unique, and like, you just don't see that, with like you said, there's not really usually a second act, for some of these transformational books, because there was only one act that you could do. That was their life.
There's only one life, but anything else anyone does, for one, they don't have the skin in the game, and second, they don't have time in the game. So without the time element, that thing isn't gonna be anything of substantial, influence. It just isn't. So unless you have 2 lifetimes, you can have 2 books.
Well, no, you can have more than one book. It's just you have to have a lot of lived experiences in between books.
Yes and no, because you think about it, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is a long book. It's like how many hours? Like 11 hours, 13 hours, something like that. Because they could actually split it up into 2 parts, or split it up to 7 parts, 1 habit each thing. But to me, as far as a book is concerned, one book is concerned, is the whole 7 habits. That's a whole, because you say, hey, there are 7 habits, I need only learn 1, right? So same thing with Taleb. He does his inserto because he decided to break it up. But essentially for me, as far as my perspective on Taleb, it's like, I'm looking at all his books, all his parts. That is the life work. That's one book to me. That's one person to me. When I read a book, I'm saying, hey, I am peeking into this life of this person, this author. Right. And so the lab happens to divide it into 2 books. He could write 1 book.
But you can tell when somebody's writing for content and they're they're writing with their soul in the game.
Write to educate or write for content. That's 2 different goals. I mean, if you write for content, then usually you write for the writing's sake, and you like Malcolm Gladwell, right? So like I said, he has a lot of books, but probably only a few of the books make sense. And the rest of them, I was like, okay, he just basically decided he needed to pick up some new topic and put his
Yeah,
spin on it, right? And
it
say,
was
well, this is what I think about this, right? Whether or not,
yeah.
this is, I have enough time to study it, to let it marinate into my head, and then maybe come up with something
Right.
brilliant. But I said, well, this is my initial thought as a spectator or as a viewer. He's
I
not in the
mean,
trenches and say, hey,
he
I'm
does
doing this, I'm
research.
doing that, right?
He researches,
Research
but
is
he's not in the
different.
trenches.
Research is one thing, right? Research is good, but it's only half the battle. Because you're talking about, like, if Malcolm Gladwell gets to the point where he actually go and talk to the people who has this desirable disadvantage, and
He does.
initially,
He does in some of them.
I think it's good. But now that I see and interview people and actually have a disadvantage of my own, I don't think so. Because if he doesn't have a disadvantage, his opinion really isn't that deep.
I agree with everything you were saying. So like Gladwell is weird because I'm actually officially finishing his last book, right? I just started it today. I was like, I might as well just keep it going. This is the last one of every Malcolm Gladwell books, and I was like, let's just do this, right? And now that I can take a look at his own library of a collection of his writings, there are certain books that are very personal to him, like Talking to Strangers, which was about racial profiling, basically, and how we can't.
If you're not in the trenches, I can only see the tip of the iceberg. I can't see what's underneath it. But only if you become entrenched in it, then you say, well, there's more to it. And
Right.
this is why the insight is so profound when somebody's spending their whole life work in this trench, and also put their soul into the game, meaning that they actually experience it. And so in those cases, those books, these other rights are good books. This is why I always look for people. I mean,
They're
like I
always
say,
interesting.
I'm not saying that there are some books that Malcolm Gladwell writes is very, very fantastic.
Well, yeah, and going back to the Kevin Smith analogy, there are Kevin Smith diehard fans. Like, one of my best friends, his name's Kevin, ironically. He loves Kevin Smith movies like Chasing Amy and Dogma and Clerks and Clerks 2 and Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back and whatever. The list goes on and on and on, right? Like, I mean, there were diehard Kevin Smith, like, people. Like, I mean, it was like a cult. Any new Kevin Smith movie that came out, they were like, gotta go see the new Kevin Smith movie. And it was all because Clerks hooked them all right at the beginning, and they were all like, man, this guy's got something. Well, Malcolm Gladwell, has something. Like Tipping Point hooked a lot of people into his way that he constructs stories, right? And then from there it's like, well, you kind of always know what you're going to get when you start a Malcolm Gladwell book. It's going to be a fun adventure. It's going to be a lot of aha moments that you probably haven't heard. It's going to be really well constructed, very well constructed argument, very some insights that you didn't see. So a lot of kind of I mean, he's like, what you're going to get. But now, like, if we're talking about it holistically, like you and I are talking about it now, he only has skin. He doesn't have soul in the game in any of his books. He has skin in the game in a few of them, and then there's a few of them that he has like nothing in the game, like David and Goliath. Like, that's the one that we were like arguing about with this whole desirable disadvantages thing. Not arguing, but this is one that you and I were discussing recently. And it's like, what the hell is that about? And that one I could say hands down is like the one that he has the least amount of anything in the game. He has nothing in the game in David and Goliath, in my opinion. At least the Tipping Point in a lot of ways is kind of about what he was even trying to do with his own book. I mean, like, that book hit the tipping point. Like it was he was constructing his own argument of how to make something into a social contagion, right? And then keep moving forward. Anyway, it doesn't matter. We have to go through like the anthology of Malcolm Gladwell books. But my point is, I think you're spot on. Like, he has no soul in the game in any. I don't think there's any crown jewel of Malcolm Gladwell's work that's going to transformationally change anybody's life if they read it. Because
you think about it, if he dies, and with his ability to tell a story, the book that he writes will be
unreal. Like, I
mean, Daniel Kahneman has like the I guess the profound insight. It's just that in his book he's he's not the best writer. Okay.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I agree with you. This is a funny conversation because this has nothing to do with the reflection, but like, it makes me think of Adam Grant. I think Adam Grant is one of the best thinkers that I've ever, and most intriguing, curious thinkers that I've ever listened to, like whether it be his podcasts or interviews with him. Even some of his books are pretty underwhelming, honestly. I feel like it's because he doesn't ever really have his whole soul in the game in any of these books. Now, Simon Sinek is like, they're like arch rivals, between the two. Or at least Simon Sinek calls Adam Grant his arch rival. Because he thinks that Adam's smarter than him, and I don't know.
So
It's like an arms race on social media between those two, and it's about a money-making venture for Simon. I think he wants to be the best. He wants to be. I don't know. I mean,
he should have only one book. Whatever he does, there's only one book that says this is Simon Sinek. Anything else that
right.
he writes ain't gonna be good. Just because what else is there for him to say, right? He can say, "Hey, I'm going to compete with Adam Grant, and I'm going to write more books." I mean, Adam Grant has how many books? Like
4.
Yeah. So Simon, even though he can write more books, there's only one book in my
Yeah,
mind that can you say, "Hey, this is Simon." The rest is like, "Hey, this is Simon trying to be."
that's exactly what I was about to say. Is I actually think Simon Sinek is a way better writer than Adam Grant, and I think he tells a better story. But the problem is, I think Simon Sinek is always just trying to tell a story. I do think he has more soul in the game, though, than Adam Grant does. Honestly, Adam Grant's more academia. Anyway, we're way down a rabbit hole, but I think it's an interesting concept that we were just talking about. Either way, like soul in the game books resonate, and study the source code, because when you find somebody with a soul in the game, it usually becomes source code for a lot of other people's skin in the game.
And to me, that's where you want to spend your time learning. You want to learn from origin, right? The origin, because the origin is essentially where it came from. And a lot of times, I would say the majority of the books out there is a regurgitation of an existing idea, because many of the goal was for content and wasn't to educate, wasn't to say, "Hey, this is my life story and my legacy. I want to pass it on. I want to let people know this is why I did this." Because you're talking about Kahneman, right? He has his career. His career is behavioral economics.
Nobel Prize winner at that point in time.
Yeah, he isn't here to say, "Hey, I want to be an author." An author is not my profession.
No.
You know what I mean? There are authors who are there is that their profession, because they are writers, they write. But when you are good at writing, you don't know what to write. You know how to write, you don't know what to write. And the people who are good at what to write don't know how to write. Because the thing is, if you spend most of your time doing behavioral experimentations to study, how people behave, how people using psychology, blah blah, practicing your psychologist skill, right? So that's just logical. You can't really say, well, this guy is really good at how to tell a story. Sometimes they have both, but it's very, very rare.
Like Taleb is really rare. Yeah. He's a great storyteller as well as soul in the game, with his own. Right. That's why I think he's so compelling, at least to me. I mean, I know he's compelling to you, but like, I love his storytelling, like because he's telling stories of his real life, of
you're talking about Fat Tony.
Right. Yeah. I mean, let's jump in, because this is about telling a better story, right? So the last part 5 of Thinking Fast and Slow is about telling a better story. As we all know, as we've learned in this journey at this point in time, humans love stories. Like that's how we think. We learned in Moonwalking with Einstein, right? When you want to be the world memory champ Olympians, they don't use rote memory. They don't use numbers. They use visuals, imagination, and stories to remember, because that's how we learn and that's how we remember things. That's how things stick. Stories are sticky. That is what we remember. That is how we process things. So Daniel Kahneman, one of the biggest lessons that I learned, and I wrote about this in my own book of I Can't Imagine, was the two selves, the experiencing self versus the remembering self. And what the difference between the two is Kahneman describes it is, to sum it up, I guess, the experiencing self is what's going on right here, right now, right? Like you and I, we're talking, it's cold in this room, I have a cough or something like that because like I inhaled a bunch of cottonwood as I was cutting the grass. It's like my hands are a little sweaty for some weird reason right now. Like, these are the things that I'm experiencing right now, right? I don't really think about it, but like really for the most part of the time, we don't really actually think about like what we're experiencing in the moment, right? Versus, in retrospect, when we go back and I think about this, like in 6 months from now or something like that, I'll think about, oh, that was a really fun story that we were talking about, soul in the game writers versus not soul in the game writers. And like, we had a great dialogue going on. I was hanging out with a really good friend of mine that we're exploring life together. And, like that's what I'll remember, right? So that's the difference between the experiencing self versus the remembering self. I won't remember anything that I just described to you of. It's kind of chilly in the room. It's my hands are sweaty, like, whatever. You know what I mean? I won't remember any of that. Like, there's no way, right? So that's what Daniel Kahneman describes as the two selves. And it made me think about the power of storytelling to yourself, right? So, and I go back to what I always go back to, which is, Amelia, right? What my family experienced, if I was just going to take the experiencing self version of what we went through with Amelia, my wife and I, it was brutal. Like every single day was monotonous. We were trapped in a room in a hospital with COVID raging around us. We spent all day long listening to bings and bongs and nurses coming in and going and doctors coming and going out of the room and being worried and anxious at the same time, trying to figure out how to keep ourselves sane going forward, trying to figure out how to take care of our daughter as best we can and how we can contribute. And every single moment in that NICU was half the time was boredom. You're just reading a book or whatever. And then there's tiny little moments every once in a while where we get to take some photos with Amelia or record her doing something new or kangaroo with her or hold her hand or something like that. But those moments were few and far between in the totality of the 39 days that she lived in this world. If you took it from the experiencing self, it was miserable for everybody. And then she passed away. If that's all we were thinking about from the experiencing self, that's what happened. She was born, we were miserable, things were hard, and then she passed away. That's not what I remember. That is not how, obviously you've read my book. That couldn't be further from my remembering self versus experiencing self. When I think about that right now today, when I think about our time in the NICU, I think of the most precious being I've ever been around. I think of somebody that had more courage and strength and the ability to endure, that I watched that happen every single minute of the day. I think of feeling calm around her with just being in her presence and hearing the breathing machines going on around, knowing that she's alive and next to me. I was having fun sometimes meeting new nurses and talking about and learning about their lives and talking to the doctors and asking a lot of questions about the care that Amelia was receiving and what she was going through, and being curious myself and learning more and more about life that we were immersed in of the NICU world. And I remember sitting in the chair next to her and reading all these different books and learning myself. I remember just being in awe of her ability to do what she was able to do. And then, what I remember most was the last 7 hours of her life after we extubated her. I saw what true courage and strength and ability to endure really looked like, as my wife and her had one last crazy long kangaroo session where they just wouldn't let each other go. And that's what I remember, right? I didn't walk away from that experience going, I told myself this story, right? Whether I did it on purpose or whether I didn't, I don't know. I don't know that I made that active decision ever, but this was a story that I chose to embrace after Amelia's passing, and the story that led me to writing the book and exploring that whole entire concept and letting people know, like, her life wasn't awful. Her life wasn't tragic. Her life was beautiful. Her life was filled with purpose and meaning, and it helped me to find my own purpose and meaning at the end of the day. And that's the story that I chose to share with the world about Amelia and about our life and my family's life. And that's the story that I live to today. And that's the story that I'll probably live for the rest of my life. And that story could have been a bad story. I mean, I could have easily had that atomic bomb, hit and woken up and told myself a story of woe is me and woe is my family and this is miserable life without her. And it is, like, it did. Like, there was definitely moments where that felt like that. But like, for whatever reason, when the good wolf and the bad wolf, were talking to me, I chose that one. I couldn't tell you why, but I did. And this is where we're at today, right? So this was kind of a pivotal lesson for me to learn, I think, along this journey. And it came from this book of telling a better story, like remembering self versus your experiencing self. You can kind of choose what narratives you place around life and then let that be your guiding purpose. And we have that power. Like, that's kind of a really cool thing about humanity. So anyway, I'd love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, I think, people are wired to experience. They're not wired to remember. Because even if you remember something, you have to re-experience it in order for you to recall the information. So, it's very, because the thing is that the way you write your book is you are essentially taking the readers into the NICU and you say, well, this is what happens, right? So an example I can give you is that if I told you that I woke up today and I had a lot of fun, right? What does that mean, right? And then I heard this noise. I went outside and I saw this bird, right? This bird is, playing with the water bowl and blah blah blah, and and my kids, were so excited to come out and they were trying to catch the bird and everybody was laughing, right? I'm just telling you what happened, but I didn't tell you it was fun. But you heard me say, the kids were excited, the kids were running around, the kids were laughing, right? These things essentially telling a story. You taking the reader through essentially what happened, and that includes you, because if you tell a story just like that, You say, well, that when you remember, and if I were to retell the story, well, if I say, well, I had fun, even I don't remember what I said to you because has no meaning to us. Okay, we cannot remember anything we cannot experience because whatever you tell me, hey, it was tragic, it was brutal, has no meaning to me.
Right.
Has no meaning to me. If you tell me about the kangaroo that your wife had, you tell me about the story that Amelia, after she was extubated, that she continued to hold on for much longer than anyone ever could. That's inspire you. It's not to say, hey, she was inspiring.
Right.
So if you told me that she was inspiring, it doesn't mean anything to me. So we can only experience. We cannot remember. When you think you remember, you're gonna have to take some part of the re-experiencing to retell the story. Because
Yeah.
if I can't do that, right, there's nothing for me to say. So if you tell me how my day, right, if I can't recall the experience, I can't tell my day. I can't tell you my day.
Right.
So we are wired for that, and so in order for any one of us to remember, so for our own sake, right, to say, well, what kind of story are you telling yourself? Is you got to tell yourself a story if you want to remember the good time. Hey, this happened, that happened, this is the result.
Right.
Because
You have to craft it.
you
Craft
can't
the narrative.
imagine fun.
Right.
You can't
Yeah.
imagine fun, and because fun could be many things. And so when you have things that's ambiguous, how can you say, well, I have this image in my head of this fun? What does that mean? It keeps changing. When it keeps changing, it's eluding you. You cannot store anywhere. And
Right.
so I think having the ability to tell you a narrative, say this, you imagine, even if you imagine it and you want to tell yourself an imaginary story, as long as you pinpoint the details of what you did, what you imagine you did, you will remember, and then you can tell it on to the next person. The first part is you can remember because you can re-experiencing it, right? And second part is if you want to be, I guess, what's the word, like persuasive in a way where you get
Mhm.
people's attention and focus. You have
Get your own attention. You can control your attention. What
you
you
want
give your attention to. I
you
mean,
want to hook people's attention. You gotta have to give them something they can experience.
mhm.
Because if I tell you about my day, right? I say, well, this morning I woke up and I stepped on poop. So and then I chased after my dog. I'm telling you a story. I'm not saying, hey, I had a bad day. You can decide that for yourself. But even if you decide that, whatever you decide, you forget. But
Right.
whatever I just told you, you will remember because that is the source code. We'll go back to the origin of the book. That's the source code. The source code can be distilled into, hey, True had a blast or True had a bad day, or True had a whatever. But the distillations always can change over time because you say, well, I hate True today because, or whatever. And then later on, you forget that you hate me.
Right.
But what I did, if you remember what I did, you can always use that to reframe your feelings about what I did, right?
Right.
And so that to me is the thing we're wired to be drawn to. So we're drawn to these details. You can tell me the most banal story about your day. Hey, today I woke up and Luca was doing this, and it hooks me into, okay, what's next? What's next? Because
Right.
we are wired to want to discover what's the next
So,
thing. But if
and
you tell me, hey, Luca was sick, or he was happy, or he was very energetic, that means nothing to me, and I can't put it in image. It's not gonna store it. Say, hey,
it's the
I has
context.
question mark, right?
Right.
A question mark. I'm gonna hold it into my short term memory. If I decided later on as what's important, I can store it.
Right.
But it won't.
It's the context is what I think you're referring to is like
The origin, the
look at
source code.
right, but setting the stage, like I can see a picture of Luca in a classroom. It's about the size of a normal kid's first grade classroom or whatever. There's 10 kids running around. In this corner over here, you got little things, and they got like 3 or 4 tables in the room, and there's like 2 teachers that are
Well,
in
I
this room.
don't think you don't need that context. Though. I just think context is good to kind of enlighten the story to make it clear, but it's the act of somebody doing something that what draws me. Because you can say, well, Luca, he took up this toy and he started to chew on it, and then all the blue ink start to spurt around. You didn't describe any of the background environment, but I am so like hooked into that. What the hell happened to? What did he chew on? Why is the blue ink, and what is the toy, right? So that to me is the hook, right? It hooks my attention, it draws my attention to your story. If you say describe it, hey, he's in this upstairs room, there's bright in the background, there's a globe background, blah blah, right? It wasn't what draws me. I think what draws me is what people do. It's more of like the action you do versus what you can distill away from. Okay, Luke got into trouble today, right? So it isn't as compelling as, hey, he chewed on this ink and this blue ink just spurts everywhere and it hits the carpet, it hits the computer, right? So the thing is the act of somebody doing something versus distilling it for people and say, hey, because you can't experience trouble, you can't experience fun.
Right.
It's what you label it, but you cannot experience it. This is what my point is. You can only experience. You cannot remember. Remembering is it's re-experiencing. If you
remembering is I actually don't think that's. I think remembering is the emotions.
You can't remember if you cannot re-experience in your head.
Well, it's not the emotions of like I don't have any emotions right now, right? Like
you don't have to. You still have to experience. Hey, what did I did, right? You go through the motion. Because the thing is, when you tell me like, how do I remember Amelia's story? It's because you took me into the room and I was, because when I read your book, right, I felt emotions because I'm experiencing it. And because I can't experience it the first time, when I can recall it because I go through the same image.
Same emotions is what you're going through. Like,
but the point I'm trying to make is that I had to experience it, right?
The emotions.
There don't have to be emotion. It could be like an image, right? Because when you look at an image, like let's say you look at a pretty face or a pretty flower or a puppy, right? You have an emotion. When you look at something that's something you don't like, maybe you hate spiders or you hate bugs or whatever. You will react to emotion. You look at it, somebody eating a lemon, you have an emotion to it.
Right.
You feel it, right? And you experiencing it. And I'm telling you, hey, I'm going to take this yellow lemon, I'm going to cut it in half, and I'm going to squeeze the juice, and I'm going to suck on it.
Right.
What do you experience now? Exactly. That's my point. My point is you have to re-experience it or imagine you experience it to recall. Because when you're telling somebody why you're experiencing it, this is what I call remembering.
Yeah, but like, I don't know that I agree with that. I think
because if you tell me about the, like I said, because I'm saying like if I say, well, this morning I decided that I want to get onto this diet and I cut this lemon wedge and I just stuck on it, right? You're experiencing it.
No, I'm not. If you told me, then I got like super tart taste in my mouth. I started spitting everywhere. I started drinking tons of different water. Then I'm feeling the emotion with you of like a panic that's like, oh my God, this is disgusting. My eyes.
And my point is the more you can recall the next time and the time after that and the time after that. But if you shorten that kind of experience, then eventually it's gonna fade.
So I guess what I was where my brain's going with this, and as we're talking through this, is like the remembering self to me is there's a whole spectrum of emotions that you can choose when you think back on an event. Like today, this past week, Luca has been sick with hand, foot, and mouth crap or whatever the hell it is. He's got these blisters all over his mouth right now. His hands look like leopards, like little leopard hands, and he's spots all over his body, and his like little butthole is just covered in these little, it's gross. It's just gross. And it's finally getting a little bit better. But like,
this is why you're telling a story. You're not saying, hey, he has foot and mouth disease and he is, whatever. You are telling me how it is, and that's what I experienced, and that's how I remember. Because otherwise, I won't remember. I say, was it foot and mouth disease, or was it something else? Was it some itch? Something like, but because I wasn't sure what kind of it. I imagined some kind of a rash, some kind of red dots on his body because I made it myself. But if you told me, hey, he has these things, blah blah blah, right? That is not something that my brain is deciding. You say, well, he told me what it is, so I'm just gonna take it and I'm gonna store it.
For sure. The way that I'm describing it to you is a way that I can interpret the story, and I'm smiling, it's fine, whatever. Like, but like I easily could have looked, as I look back on this past week, there's been times where it's been incredibly frustrating because I'm trying to work at the same time as taking care of a sick child. My wife and I are fighting back and forth about who's doing what, when, where, because we both have day jobs that we have to do and all these other stuff that we have to coordinate our life around, you know, when life changes and we have a sick child and can't go to daycare and all this other stuff. So like I could have easily narrated the story about how pissed I am about my wife, how pissed I am about this is going on. This is like the 5th fucking time that he's been fucking sick, you know. This is the, you know, I could have gone on this negative tangent rant. I could have picked that emotion out of this and said, you know what, like this is what I'm going to anchor on, and this is how I'm going to craft this narrative around, and this is how I'm going to describe this to true of what life has been like over on this side of the Zoom chat, you know, for the past week. Or I could go, you know what, I've actually been okay this week. Like, you know, I mean, it sucks, like, you know, having a sick child, but at the same time, like, I kind of like having him here every once in a while. And now I've gotten pretty damn good at, you know, figuring out how to navigate my day, my work life, and taking care of a sick child because I've done it so much over the past 6 months since he's been in daycare. So I actually don't mind anymore. And when my wife gets mad about stuff, I'm just kind of like, yeah, whatever. It's not a big deal. Like, you know, we'll figure it out. Like, you know, she's like, you know, I'm like, I don't actually really care anymore. So I'm saying that this is how I'm thinking about the remembering side of everything, where that's the narrative that I'm choosing to tell myself. And that's how it comes across, I feel like, when I say that to somebody, because I can easily pick from like a platter of emotions and I'm like, that's the emotion I'm choosing to pick.
Yeah. So I mean, I agree. I mean, what you're saying isn't different from what I'm trying to say. I'm just saying that the way that you have to store, right? Because you experience something, you can take it, and in order for you to remember, you have to retell the story to yourself for you to remember. And when you retell, you are trying to re-experiencing whatever you experience. The other one you don't, right? You have to re-experience for it to store. If you don't re-experience it, it won't store it. Because among the days, it could be something that hey, you don't like, but then
that's what I'm trying to say is like I can re-experience it in a million different ways when I remember.
I don't think you remember the interpretation because you can interpret something, but you forget it. Let's say there's certain things I do. Hey, maybe I'm talking about the bird, right? And my kids were having fun and we were laughing and they were, you know, trying to chase the bird and trying to catch the bird, right? And we're having fun, right? That to me, the source code of what we remember is the activity that the kid did, right? Or there could be another activity where I step out and I step on a bunch of poop and I had a bad experience. I experienced that too, but I decided I decided to take the kids with the birds and retell it to myself and retell it to you. I mean, I'm re-experiencing it. The other one I just left alone and eventually it fades, right? Because if I say, well, you know, on Thursday I had fun time with the kid, if I were to interpret that as a good time today, I would not remember because there's no way for me to recall that. I can recall it, but there's nothing for it to write to your storage, your memory, because after that you say, well, I had a fun day Thursday. What day was it? You completely forget. But if I can say, well, the kids is chasing the bird is this color, the bird trying to do this, the bird, you know, that is what I will remember. And the interpretation can come later. Interpretation comes as you bring it up and re-experiencing. But I understand that you can choose what you want to recall because the experience is there. But if you interpret the experience, right, and without the source code, without the origin, that will fade quickly. That's why you don't remember. That's why meaning one of the art of studying isn't to say, well, I'm going to repeat this 1,000 times, because if you do that, what happens? You can pass the test because short-term memory. But after that, you completely forget it. You have no idea what you don't remember a single thing. But if you say, well, I want to know what happens to this molecule when I add this. If I go to chemistry, I'm a chemist, right? I don't imagine the formulas. I imagine the molecules. I imagine the little thing, like it goes and it bounces each other, right? I remember them. I mean, because to me, chemistry is easy.
Well, it's like a photograph.
Right. That's what I'm saying. We are wired. We are wired to repeat and imagine things that you can imagine because that thing is concrete. Anything that you interpret, it's more of a ambiguous labeling, like fun. Fun could mean 1,000 things.
Right.
Right?
This reflection is not much different than a photograph for me. You know, like, I mean, it's something I can look back on and I can get
Something.
it takes me back. And no, yeah, no, seriously, it takes me back
Something that you
into,
can. That's my point, right?
right.
So
Right. Yeah.
eventually, you have to experience it to remember it, because if you can't experience it, then whatever you tell your story,
Yeah.
it's not, it's going to be hard to remember. So my point is that when you tell yourself something to remember, and you can decide what you can tell yourself, and that's why I agree with you. You decide, hey, there are good things and bad things. I decide to retell the story of the good things, and that will continue to get anchored and continue to write into the memory. And I will remember that, because you're talking about writing a book.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why your book is so compelling to me is it moves me, because you took me through the steps. You didn't tell me how it was.
Right.
You told me how it is. This is what happened. I went to this. I sit down in this chair. I read this kind of, and you told me not only I read some book. No, you read. I read this book, right? I was on this page, right? That can't be any more clarity than that, right? You look at a rocking chair. You're
Describing a
doing the
photo,
kangaroo. You're doing a kangarooing session with
right.
your daughter and your wife doing it, right? The feeling that comes out of it, that is what I remember, and I can see. I read it once,
Yeah,
and I can remember it. That's what I'm saying. If you want to remember the good times, tell yourself the story in that fashion.
okay, so this is a picture of my wife and I at a vineyard in Spain. So it's a photo of my wife and I at a vineyard in Spain. Apple keeps popping this thing up into my photo. You don't have an Apple, do you? You have an Android. Yeah. So does it show you this day in history or whatever?
Yeah.
So for whatever weird reason, a couple of trips that we have on my phone always pop up, and for whatever reason, I probably because I click on them a lot. Like these trips come back up all the time, right? And the funny thing is about this photo, like we look super happy, we're ecstatic, we're on the rooftop of I can see it in my head right now. We're on the rooftop of this vineyard, the mountains in the back from Catalonia was where we were at, like near Barcelona, and we were drinking, having a great time and exploring this place. And I remember the bus trip out there, and I remember seeing Montserrat, which is like this monastery that was up in this mountain chain that was near there, and the little vineyards that we were touring and stuff, and we're having a great time. But the truth is, I think I also remember that night was when I discovered I had bed bugs all over me, because we were staying in this hotel or this Airbnb in Barcelona. And in that photo, that same photo, I have bed bugs everywhere. And I'm pretty sure my wife and I got into a fight that night. I don't even remember what it was, but it was something.
You didn't tell yourself the story.
This photo, I'm like, oh man, that was such a great day, that when I see that photo. But then I also am like, oh my God, like I had bed bugs everywhere, bites all over me. That was like our second to last night in Barcelona. And I like the next day that I woke up, they were like swollen everywhere, and I was like, what the fuck is happening? I slept on the couch the last night, and like, somehow my wife didn't get bit, like, or she only got bit like once. I'm like, what the hell? I don't sleep with a shirt on, so I think I got bit like all over my body, but she had clothes on, I guess. But anyway, my point of what I was bringing up with this is, like, I see this photo and I go, oh, what a great day, and then now that we're talking about this, I'm like,
now
man, that could have easily been like an awful day. I could easily have gone like yeah, that was right before, that, like, actually, I wonder if you can see it in this photo, but there was I remember scratching on the bus ride out to this vineyard, like it was underneath like my polo cuff or whatever, and I was like, man, what am I like and I was like, did I get stung by a mosquito? And by the time I got home, I had like these 4 like things, and then by the end of the night, I had like all these like things all over me, and I was like, oh my God, I think we have bed bugs. And like, anyway, and we did, yeah. And that guy did not refund us. He only gave us a half off. I'm like, half off? You gave me bed bugs, like, man, like, I think that deserves a full refund, right? But he did not. Anyway, that's the only time I've ever had a bad. Actually, the apartment was an amazing apartment too. It was an awesome place in Barcelona. We just got unlucky with that one, because I've stayed in so many Airbnbs in Europe, like, and never had a bad experience. That was the only one. That was probably the nicest one we've ever stayed in too. And it was one that had bed bugs, ironically. Anyway, all right, I'm done. I'm done for the night. Any other things you wanted to touch on? Any final thoughts?
No.
So the question I think we can leave for everybody is, what story are you telling yourself? I think it's pretty clear.
How do you tell a story where you can re-experience it? To me, that's the key.
You re-experience it is a question, like, because do you re-experience it just in how do you document that? Like, is it a photo? Or do you write it out? Do you, like, how do you remember? How do you document what happened so you could then go craft a narrative around that? Because I think that's probably one of the hardest things, is like you were saying, like, to remember even what happened, because I wouldn't have remembered what happened in on that rooftop in Barcelona. Whenever I see that, it makes me happy. You know what I mean?
Right.
But like, I definitely remember having bed bugs, you know, or something like that night. So how do you remember the good stuff? Like you have to document it somehow, right?
Yeah, you have to document them. That's why the thing is, it's all because every single memory need to have what I call an address, meaning where do I start with it? Usually it's a photo, usually it's a video, usually a souvenir. Those are the key to access that storage. Meaning when you look at the photo, the only thing you remember from just the photo itself.
Yep.
Same thing, you document it by you taking pictures, document by writing it, document by telling. The only way for us to document it is to pass on the story, is to tell the story every night. After the hunt, we will sit down around the campfire and we'll tell the story of how you took down the woolly mammoth, or how back in the day when you had to do blah blah blah, or how something was made, or how I got the skin or whatever. That's how you create
pass
this.
on knowledge. I mean,
yeah, I mean that's how you document.
Right.
Back then, it's how you document it. So you tell a story again.
Right.
Everybody is hooked into listening to the story, and that has basically been buried and burned into our DNA. That's why psychologically we are drawn to people who can tell a good story. It could be something, hey, my day was I went to HEB, or I went to the grocery store and I saw this fruit, right? No, it doesn't have to be. I just say, hey, I saw this fruit. And behind a bunch of fruit. What's the point? Well, I was hungry.
That's funny.
And I wanted fruit, right? Even then, it is exciting for us to say, well, it's a good story. It was fun, right? Hey, I had this epic adventure where I was wrestling a shark. But if you can't tell me how you wrestled the shark, say the shark was, was strong and it was powerful, it means nothing to me. It means nothing. I mean, maybe I went to go straight and I bumped my side into the corner of the food cart tray, and I get this pinching pain, and I was like, guy, like become this hunch, like a side hunchback kind of guy, and limping for the next 5 minutes, right? Even that is exciting versus, hey, I wrestled a strong whale and I won.
Right.
I think about.
No, I agree with you. By the way, did you know what HEB stands for? I just learned this the other day.
Yeah, it's Harold E. Butt.
Yeah.
That's the guy's name. He lives in San Antonio.
I know. His last name is Butt?
Yes.
So weird. That'd be the worst. That's gotta be the worst last name ever. My name's Butt,
But he has HEB now, so I don't know.
No wonder they called it HEB. I'm glad they didn't call it, hey, go to the Butt supermarket, nobody, I don't think anybody would be shopping, hey, get the freshest butt, freshest meat at Butts, Anyway, all right. Let's call it for the night. That was a fun conversation as always. And that concludes our Thinking Fast and Slow.
And
no
maybe
more. Actually,
it could be part 6 or 5.
Hey, you never know. You never know. I did write 2 more for Black Swan actually recently after I read.
Oh, you did? Black Swan has a part 1 or 2 and part 6. Yeah. Okay. Part 6 or 5.
Well, no, we're on an ultra marathon now. Now I'm just writing for fun. So like this is just going to be for you and I to talk about on our podcast. Like this is no longer, YOML is over in my mind, right? Like YOML has ended at 365. Now it's just, let's just have fun, and we're running an ultra marathon now, and ultra marathons, I don't know where we're going, but
we're not running a marathon, we're just running.
No, yeah, Fred, that's what I meant. Like we're just
I'm just running.
Distance.
I don't know about a marathon. I'm just running. They're running. That's all I see. I don't see, hey, I'm running a marathon, because marathon has a definition to it. Hey,
it has an endpoint.
For me, I'm just running. So where are you running? I'm just running.
Agreed. Yes. Now we're just running. So like now I'm just writing about, I'm off on some random trail, and I don't know where we're going, but like it's fine.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah. No, it'll be fun.
I don't think it matters where we're going, as long as we're going somewhere. As long as we're going, that's what I enjoy. So to me, is in like, hey, I get to that point, because if I do that, then I gotta find another place to go, because that's how we're wired. We can't get to a place and stay there. We are made to move, and as long as I'm moving, I am satisfied. I'm fulfilled. I get to do whatever activity that moves you and give you this happy, goody feeling inside. That's what you should be doing, versus trying to do what you are told to do.
Agreed. All right. Have a great night for everyone. The question we can leave for you is what story you're telling yourself. We will see you all next week.
Good night.